Welcome to the Compliance Officer's Playbook podcast. We're diving deep today into the World Economic Forum's Global Cybersecurity Outlook for 2025. Um, it's a fascinating report packed with insights, on things like the rise of cybercrime, the growing influence of AI, and a whole bunch of other trends.
Yeah, and it's not just like a snapshot of where we are right now. It's looking ahead at what forces are going to shape the future of cybersecurity. For compliance officers especially, this kind of foresight is really crucial.
Absolutely. The report paints this picture of increasing complexity in the cybersecurity world. It's geopolitics, complex supply chains, and technologies like AI, that are just evolving so rapidly.
And then there's the cyber skills gap that's only getting wider. Organizations are really struggling to find and keep qualified professionals who can keep up with all these threats that are always changing.
Right. And that leads to something the report calls cyber inequity. Basically, smaller organizations are having a really hard time keeping up in this cyber arms race, I guess you could call it.
Hmm.
The report says that 35% of them think they don't have good enough cyber resilience. That's 7 times higher than it was a couple years ago.
What's really concerning is that a lot of these smaller organizations don't even realize how vulnerable they are. They just might not have the resources for risk assessments or something. Or maybe they just underestimate how good cyber criminals are these days.
So while the big organizations are getting better at protecting themselves, the smaller ones are becoming more vulnerable. And that creates a ripple effect because, the security of everyone is only as strong as the weakest link.
Exactly. And this goes way beyond just data breaches. The report highlights how cybercrime is actually starting to have real-world impacts.
That's a scary thought. Remember that huge IT outage in 2024? It shut down airlines, banks, even hospitals. It was a big wake-up call that our systems are all connected, and one little vulnerability can cause a huge domino effect.
Yeah, cybercrime isn't just about stealing data anymore. Now you see attacks that try to disrupt critical infrastructure and mess with the economy. It's even tied to things like human trafficking now. The stakes are really, really high.
It's kind of mind-blowing. And
Mm.
then you have AI, which seems like it could be both good and bad for cybersecurity.
Yeah, it really is a double-edged sword. The report says that 66% of organizations think AI will be the most important thing affecting cybersecurity this year.
That makes sense, right? I mean, AI can be used to build better defenses, right? So what's the problem?
The problem is that only 37% of organizations have a process for checking the security of AI tools before they use them. They know it's a risk, but they're doing it anyway.
It's like putting a brand new engine in your car, but not checking if the brakes work.
Hmm.
It shows that we need to think carefully about the security of AI before we just go all in on it.
Couldn't agree more. We need to ask ourselves, how can we be sure AI algorithms are secure? What are the weak points in AI systems? And how do we stop bad guys from using them against us?
Okay, so we've got complexity, this cyber inequity thing, and AI is a wild card. What else is in this report?
Well, there's quantum computing too. It's not mainstream yet, but the report says organizations need to start preparing for what it could do to encryption.
You mean the harvest now, decrypt later idea, where hackers steal encrypted data now so they can unlock it once quantum computers are strong enough.
Exactly. And it's not just a theory. 40% of organizations are already doing things to prepare for this quantum threat.
That's good. But what about the other 60%? They're basically just waiting for a disaster to happen.
It's a wake-up call. Organizations need to start planning for a world with quantum computers. Maybe they need to look at new types of encryption or change how long they keep data. There are lots of options.
And speaking of planning, the report talks about all the new cybersecurity regulations. There seems to be a global push to improve basic security and build more trust.
It's true. We're seeing tons of new regulations. In Europe, you have the NIS2 directive. In the US, there's CISA's Cyber Incident Reporting Act. And there are more, all over the place. They're trying to improve security and standardize how incidents are reported.
So more regulations for compliance officers to track. Sounds like a dream come true.
Well, not really. There are so many and they're all different. That actually creates a lot of headaches for organizations. It's hard to balance all these different rules and also come up with your own strategies for managing risks.
And all this is happening while the cyber skills gap is getting worse. The report says it's actually grown by 8% since last year.
That's really worrying.
Yeah, and it's not just about filling empty jobs. Organizations need people with specific skills, especially in areas like AI. But there's not enough training for that yet.
So it's like this whirlwind of new threats, new rules, and not enough skilled people to deal with it all.
Yeah.
It's a lot to handle. It is. But the report actually has some good ideas for how to handle this complexity. It talks about something called the economics of cybersecurity, which I think is really interesting.
Okay, that does sound interesting. What are the economics of cybersecurity?
Well, it's about understanding how cyber risk affects your finances and making smart decisions based on that.
So you're saying instead of thinking of cybersecurity as just another cost, we need to see it as an investment that can actually protect and even increase the value of an organization.
Exactly. And one of the main points is that not doing anything about security often costs way more than being proactive.
That makes sense. A data breach or a ransomware attack can be devastating financially, not to mention what it does to your reputation.
Exactly. The report says that leaders need to learn how to measure cyber risks in terms of money. If you can explain those risks in dollars and cents, then it's easier to justify spending money on security and figure out which things are most important.
So that puts compliance officers in a very important position. They're the ones who need to understand the regulations, assess the risks, and help their organizations build effective cybersecurity strategies.
Absolutely. They need to be more than just people who follow rules. They have to think strategically, analyze risk, and maybe even think like an economist a little.
Sounds like a tough job, but a very important one.
It really is. And that's why I think this report is so valuable. It gives us a whole new framework for thinking about cybersecurity in a more comprehensive and strategic way.
It sounds like a must-read for anyone who deals with compliance or cybersecurity, especially right now.
I definitely agree.
But before you go download it, let's dive into some of the specific takeaways. One thing that jumped out at me was the evolving role of the CISO.
It's a really fascinating change. The CISO isn't just a tech expert anymore. Now they're becoming strategic advisors to the board. They have to bridge the gap between those complex technical risks and what they could mean for the business as a whole.
That seems essential these days. Cybersecurity isn't just an IT issue anymore. It's a business issue that can affect everything.
And the report says that good CISOs are figuring out how to measure cyber risk in terms of things like financial loss, regulatory impact, and customer trust.
So they're learning to speak the language of business, right? That helps CEOs and boards understand why it's so important to invest in cybersecurity.
Exactly. And that's why we're seeing a shift in reporting structures. More CISOs are reporting directly to the CEO now, which shows how much more influential they're becoming.
So CISOs are becoming strategic advisors, explaining cyber risks in terms of business impact and getting more power within organizations. What else does the report say about how to handle all this complexity?
Well, it really emphasizes collaboration and information sharing as being crucial for good cybersecurity.
Earlier, we were talking about cyber inequity and how smaller organizations are struggling. This seems like an area where the larger organizations could really help by sharing what they know and what resources they have.
Absolutely. The report says that 50% of organizations think sharing information and threat intelligence is the best way for countries to cooperate on cybersecurity.
You mean things like participating in those computer emergency response teams, the CERTs, or those information sharing and analysis centers, the ISACs?
Exactly. When organizations share information about threats, vulnerabilities, and best practices, they're helping everyone improve their cybersecurity. It benefits everyone involved.
It's like that saying, a rising tide lifts all boats. But in this case, it's a rising tide of cyber awareness that protects everyone.
That's a great analogy. And it's not just about organizations sharing with each other. The report also talks about the importance of governments and businesses working together.
Public-private partnerships, I mean. Like when governments and businesses work together to create policies, share intelligence, and coordinate how they respond to cyber threats.
Exactly. That kind of collaboration is essential for tackling cybercrime because it's so complex and often crosses international borders.
And speaking of crossing borders, the report also highlights how geopolitical tensions are having a growing impact on cybersecurity. It's like the lines between the real world and cyberspace are getting blurrier.
That's a really important point. Conflicts between countries are spilling over into cyberspace. It's leading to more targeted attacks, espionage, and even attempts to disrupt critical infrastructure. Organizations need to understand what's happening in the world and factor that into their risk assessments.
So it's not just about protecting yourself from hackers anymore. You have to understand the bigger picture of where cyber threats are coming from and why.
That's right. And this is only going to get more complex in the years to come.
Wow, there's a lot to think about. We've covered so much ground in this deep dive already.
Yeah, we've talked about the growing complexity of cyberspace, the challenges of cyber inequity, how AI is a double-edged sword, the threat of quantum computing, the changing role of the CISO, and how important collaboration is in this constantly changing landscape.
And we're just getting started. There's so much more to discuss in the Global Cybersecurity Outlook for 2025.
In the next part of this deep dive, we'll look at specific strategies for improving cyber
We'll
resilience.
cover things like incident response planning, security awareness training, and how to manage supply chain risk. All really practical things that organizations can do to deal with this complex world.
It'll be a packed session full of useful tips for compliance officers and anyone involved in cybersecurity.
We'll be right back with more from the Global Cybersecurity Outlook for 2025 after a short break.
Okay, so let's pick up where we left off and talk about some practical things that organizations can do to boost their cyber resilience. The report really highlights how important incident response is. It's not enough to just, have a plan. You need to create a whole culture where reporting incidents is encouraged and even rewarded in some way.
So you're saying we need to move away from that blame and shame thing that sometimes happens when there's a security incident? That
Mhm.
can really stop people from speaking up.
Yeah, exactly. The report found that organizations with good cyber resilience are actively trying to build a security culture that's open and transparent.
Makes sense. Did the report give any specific examples of how organizations are doing that?
Oh, yeah, definitely. It mentioned a few interesting things, like some organizations are doing comprehensive training and awareness programs about cybersecurity. Others have dedicated teams to help with reporting incidents. And some even let people report things anonymously if they want.
Those are all great ideas. The point is to make people feel safe, so they'll speak up if they see something fishy or if they, make a mistake themselves. Let's face it, we all make mistakes sometimes.
Right. And the sooner someone reports an incident, the faster you can contain it and fix it. That limits the damage and helps prevent the same thing from happening again.
Absolutely. But incident response is just one piece of the puzzle. The report also talks a lot about security awareness training.
Oh, that's absolutely fundamental. Employees are usually the first line of defense when it comes to cyber attacks. You need to give them the knowledge and skills to spot threats and avoid them.
Yeah. Think about all the common traps out there. Phishing scams, suspicious links, weak passwords, all those everyday things can create big vulnerabilities.
Exactly. Security awareness training can't just be a one-time thing. It has to be engaging, relevant to people's jobs, and it has to keep happening. It's about building a security-conscious culture throughout the whole organization.
And that culture needs to go beyond just the organization itself, right? What about managing supply chain risk? The report highlighted how interconnected everything is these days. One weak link in the chain can affect the whole ecosystem.
Supply chain risk management is more important than ever. Organizations need to carefully check the security of their suppliers and partners. A weakness in your supply chain can be just as bad as a weakness within your own organization.
Yeah, the report had some pretty striking statistics. It said 54% of large organizations see those supply chain challenges as the biggest obstacle to good cyber resilience.
It's a huge problem. Organizations have to be proactive about managing those risks. That means setting security standards for their suppliers, doing their due diligence, and constantly monitoring for any signs of trouble throughout the whole supply chain.
And this ties back to that concept of cyber inequity, right? Smaller organizations often don't have the resources to do those thorough supply chain risk assessments. That puts them at higher risk, and by extension, it makes the whole ecosystem more vulnerable.
Exactly. That's why it's so important for larger organizations, especially those with mature cybersecurity programs, to help smaller ones improve their security.
Didn't the report have some suggestions for how they could do that?
Yes, they could share information, provide guidance, maybe even offer financial incentives to help those smaller organizations implement stronger security measures. It's all about realizing that cyber resilience is a group effort, not just an individual thing.
Speaking of group efforts, the report also talked about how important international cooperation is in dealing with cyber threats. Cybercrime crosses national borders all the time, so it requires a coordinated response from the whole world.
Right. The report found that 50% of organizations believe sharing information and threat intelligence is the most effective way for countries to work together on cybersecurity.
But it also said those efforts are still too fragmented and siloed. There's a lot of room for improvement in coordinating a truly global response to cybercrime.
Definitely. We need better ways to share information, coordinate responses, and even harmonize regulations across different countries. A more unified approach would make a huge difference.
Makes sense. Cybercriminals don't care about national boundaries, so why should our defenses stop at the border?
That's a great point. And it brings us back to one of the main themes in this report, which is the need to fundamentally change how we think about cybersecurity.
You're saying it's not just about technology or rules.
Right. It's about building a culture of security at every level of an organization, from the top down. Everyone needs to understand that cybersecurity is a strategic priority, and it's everyone's responsibility.
And that's a message that goes way beyond just compliance officers.
Yeah.
CEOs, board members, everyone in the organization, even individuals in their personal lives, need to get it.
Exactly. We're all part of this interconnected digital world, and we all have a role to play in making it safer and more secure.
Well said. So, the report covers some pretty complex stuff like AI, quantum computing, and geopolitics.
Yeah.
But it also offers some surprisingly simple advice for improving cyber resilience.
One thing that really stood out to me was the emphasis on basic cyber hygiene. Strong passwords, keeping software updated, being careful about phishing scams, all those basic things that we sometimes forget about.
It's like the cyber equivalent of washing your hands.
Exactly. It's easy to get caught up in all the fancy new technology, but the report reminds us that these basic practices are still really important.
They're the foundation of good cybersecurity. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective.
I agree. But even if you do everything right, incidents are still going to happen. No system is perfect.
So you have to be prepared, right? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the report stresses how important it is to have good incident response plans, to do regular vulnerability assessments, and to test your defenses to make sure they can actually withstand real-world attacks.
It's about being prepared for when something bad happens, not just hoping it won't. And that preparedness takes constant effort because the threats are always changing.
It's a journey, not a destination. Organizations have to stay alert and keep adapting their strategies.
One of the biggest challenges for a lot of organizations is the cyber skills gap we talked about earlier. Finding and keeping qualified cybersecurity professionals is tough.
It is. But the report has some good advice for tackling that. It suggests looking beyond traditional cyber degrees when you're recruiting. Consider candidates who have different backgrounds and experiences.
So someone with a background in data analytics or law enforcement could be a good fit for a cybersecurity team.
Absolutely. Their different perspectives can be very valuable. The report also highlights the importance of upskilling current employees, giving them training and development opportunities so they can keep up with the latest trends.
That's a smart way to invest in your people and show them that you value what they bring to the organization.
And don't forget about retention. You have to create a supportive and rewarding work environment to fight burnout, which is a huge problem in the cybersecurity world.
I can see why. It's a demanding job with long hours, tons of stress, and the constant worry that one mistake could be disastrous.
Yeah, organizations need to make the well-being of their cybersecurity teams a priority. They could offer flexible work arrangements, opportunities for professional development, and even access to mental health resources.
It's about recognizing that your people are your most valuable asset in cybersecurity and treating them accordingly.
Exactly. And that brings us back to one of the main themes of this report. We need a more holistic, human-centric approach to cybersecurity.
It's not just about the technology. It's about people, culture, collaboration, and a shared responsibility for security. It's about creating a cybersecurity ecosystem that's strong and can adapt to change.
And it's about understanding that cybersecurity is a journey, not a destination. We're always learning, adapting, and evolving as the threats change.
The Global Cybersecurity Outlook for 2025 has been a great roadmap for that journey. It shows us the challenges, but it also gives us some practical ways to handle this complex world.
We've only just begun to explore this insightful report, but I hope this discussion has given you a better grasp of the major trends shaping the future of cybersecurity.
And maybe it's given you some ideas about how to improve your own organization's cyber resilience.
Remember, cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility.
And by working together, sharing information, and investing in our people, we can create a safer and more secure digital world for everyone.
Now, let's move on to the final part of our deep dive. We'll take a closer look at how the role of the CISO is changing and explore the challenges of the cyber skills gap.
We'll discuss some innovative approaches to recruiting, training, and retaining talent in this fast-paced and constantly changing field. Stay tuned. So as we wrap up our deep dive into the global cybersecurity outlook, let's circle back to the human element of all this.
Yeah, it's easy to get fixated on the tech, Side firewalls, encryption, AI defenses, but cybersecurity really comes down to people.
It's about the people who defend our systems and also the everyday users who can accidentally create those vulnerabilities.
Exactly. And this report really focuses on how one role in particular is changing to fit this human-centric approach, the CISO.
We've talked about the CISO a bit already, but I'm curious to hear more about this evolution you mentioned.
Well, the CISO isn't just a tech expert anymore. They're becoming more like strategic advisors to the board, risk managers, communicators, even kind of like psychologists in a way.
Wow, that's a lot of hats to wear. What's behind this shift?
I think cybersecurity is finally being seen as a business risk, not just an IT problem. So CISOs have to be able to speak the language of business now.
So they need to be able to explain those complex technical risks to people like CEOs and board members who might not have a tech background.
Exactly. They have to be able to explain the financial impact, the regulatory stuff, the damage to customer trust. They have to make it clear why cybersecurity is important for the whole organization to succeed.
That makes sense. It's not just about stopping data breaches, it's about protecting the company's money and reputation.
Right. And the report shows how effective CSOs are actually putting numbers to those cyber risks, like specific amounts of money lost, fines, customer churn. It's all right there.
That definitely raises the profile of the CISO within an organization.
It does. But it's not just about talking the talk. CISOs also need to walk the walk when it comes to building a strong security culture.
You mean it's not enough to have rules and procedures. You have to create an environment where everyone gets why cybersecurity is important and they actually take part in protecting the organization.
Exactly. CISOs need to be like champions for security awareness. They have to promote best practices and make it okay for employees to report incidents and ask questions without being afraid of getting in trouble.
I can see how that could be challenging, especially in places where security has always been seen as IT's problem and not something everyone needs to worry about.
Oh, it's a huge culture change for sure. But the report argues that it's absolutely essential. It's not just about checking boxes, it's about making security everyone's responsibility.
And speaking of responsibility, let's talk about the cyber skills gap. It's a problem that never seems to go away.
Yeah, and it's only getting worse. The report says it's grown another 8% since last year.
That's alarming. And like we said before, it's not just about finding enough people to fill the jobs. Organizations need people with very specific skills, especially in things like AI and cloud security, where the demand is through the roof.
It's true. The competition for talent is fierce, which drives up salaries and makes it even harder for some organizations to get and keep those qualified people.
So what can organizations do about this? I know the report had some suggestions.
One idea is to think beyond the usual places when you're recruiting. Don't limit yourself to people with traditional cybersecurity degrees.
So think outside the box a little.
Exactly. Look for people with experience in areas like data analytics, law enforcement, maybe even psychology. They could have skills that translate well to cybersecurity roles.
Yeah, someone with a psychology background might be really good at figuring out how cybercriminals think and what their tactics are.
Exactly. And the report also talks about how important it is to train your current employees, giving them the opportunity to learn new skills so they can keep up with the changes.
It's a win-win, right?
Yeah.
It helps employees grow in their careers, and it gives the organization the skilled workers it needs.
And we can't forget about keeping those employees, too. The report says it's crucial to create a supportive environment that helps prevent burnout. Burnout is a huge problem in cybersecurity.
Yeah, I can understand why. It's a high-pressure job with long hours and the constant fear that one mistake could cause a disaster.
So organizations need to make sure their cybersecurity teams are doing okay. That means offering things like flexible work arrangements, chances for professional development, and access to resources for their mental health.
It's about recognizing that your people are your most valuable asset when it comes to cybersecurity. You have to treat them well.
I agree 100%. And this all goes back to one of the most important ideas in the report. We need a more holistic approach to cybersecurity, one that puts people at the center.
So it's not just about technology.
Right. It's about people, culture, collaboration, and a shared sense of responsibility for security. It's about creating a system that can withstand attacks and also adapt to change.
And it's about understanding that cybersecurity isn't something you achieve. It's an ongoing process. We have to keep learning and adapting as the threats evolve.
Absolutely. The Global Cybersecurity Outlook has been a great guide for us on this journey. It lays out the challenges and gives us a roadmap for navigating this complex world.
We've only touched on some of the highlights, but I hope this discussion has helped you understand the major trends in cybersecurity.
And hopefully it's given you some ideas for improving your organization's own cyber resilience.
Remember, cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility. By working together, sharing information, and investing in our people, we can make the digital world a safer place for everyone. If you enjoyed this deep dive, we invite you to become a paid subscriber today for $4.99. You'll get full access to all our premium episodes packed with insights, stories, and value you won't find anywhere else. The link is in the show notes. Thanks for listening.